Hello, welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponder. I'm the host, Neil Trotter. And today we're going to be talking about current affairs. Now I know there are people who watch my videos and they don't like it when I talk about current affairs. They like to keep their philosophy pristine, devoid of real world situations, right? Practical scenarios that happen in real life, right? In that way, philosophy is pure. It's transcendent. The only philosophy that's valid philosophy deals with the abstract, the theoretical, right? But part of this channel is about bringing philosophy down to earth, and using philosophy as a utility, which I personally think philosophy is underutilized as a real world tool that we can use to address very significant problems that humanity faces. And one of those issues that we face that we have yet to solve is the issue of safety, the issue of crime. How do we deal with safety? How do we deal with crime? How do we address these issues? And it is very apparent that the way we deal with crime and safety in our society is not effective. And one of the major ways that many societies, the one I live in, United States of America, how they address crime and safety is through policing. But does policing really work? Or what really is policing? These are philosophical questions. And I think as we delve into these questions philosophically, as well as, using sciences like sociology, we can begin to come up with some solutions that are better than what we have, right? And we're going to do this via this book, right? It's called The End of Policing. It's by Alex Vitale. And we're going to use this book, and there's some quotes that I'm going to read from the book as a springboard, as a supplement to some philosophical discussion about policing, the nature of policing, and what do the police actually do? What do they not do? What is safety? Like, what is crime? And how do we define crime? I mean, is the way that we define crime helpful, or does it serve another purpose, right? Our definition of crime, is it helpful for us as a society towards safety, or is it, serving other purposes, that definition? So I'm just going to begin with quotes. That's what we do here at the Black Ponder. See, we actually read the book. So, we don't do like book reviews. We don't do like book overviews or cliff notes. I would encourage you, check this book out. It's a nice book. Maybe there's some naysayers that are saying, oh, this is, critical race theory, or this is far right-wing radicalism. No, it's a very well-researched academic book that is not like overly complex or like overly jargon heavy. It's a great book. So I want to read some quotes from the book, and then to further philosophical discussion along. So I will begin here in case you have the book. I will just, what is this? I'll literally start on the first page. This is actually the preface to the 2021 edition. This was reissued. This is the updated edition. So it's a reprint, and that's a new preface. And this is page Roman numeral I, right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Roman numeral 7. So it's a preface. So it's the author, this is from his perspective. And here he's talking about his early work in the early 90s, actually 1990s, in the San Francisco Bay Area, when he was actually going to college and doing social work, which is kind of interesting because, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, the city of Oakland. I came up in the 1990s. I was a little kid then, so I know the context of what he's talking about. At that time, there was very little discussion of the criminal justice system in urban studies courses. It was considered an independent concern, handled by criminology, and was disconnected from debates about affordable housing, tax policy, and community economic development initiatives. My research on urban enterprise zones and community-based housing initiatives never overlapped with issues of policing and incarceration. Okay, right? Community-based housing initiatives did not overlap with issues of policing and incarceration. Those were two separate issues, right? Back in those days. But what he's going to bring up is like those things are tightly intertwined, right? And that's what we need to talk about. This separation between the two became disruptive for me when we first observed the increasing police harassment of poor and homeless folks in San Francisco. I definitely remember that time. You know, it's still happening today, but that was my first encounter and awareness of the situation. As a little kid, I'd see that and be like, whoa, that's awkward. This began under Mayor Art Agnes, a liberal Democrat who expanded police power to arrest people sleeping outdoors despite a lack of sufficient shelter beds, and ordered the mass arrest of Food Not Bombs volunteers. Food Not Bombs activist organization that feeds hungry people, among other things. Sharing free food in support of homeless encampments. Okay? These moves culminated in a full-scale anti-homeless backlash in which the chief of police, Frank Jordan, was elected mayor on a platform of criminalizing poverty in 1991. This led to the widespread abuses in which the city ticketed, harassed, and arrested people for sleeping in public, panhandling, sharing free food, and merely taking up space in the center of the city. Okay, so that's, I highlighted that because it's important. What do police do, right? What is considered crime? Is most of what the police do is handling violent offenders, or is it stuff like sharing free food, taking up space in the city center, panhandling? Think about this. And so I'm going to skip forward to the last sentence of the second paragraph on the next page here. This is Roman numeral number 8. In many cases, though, the police properly followed the law, but the laws they were enforcing were fundamentally unjust, such as criminalizing aggressive panhandling or arresting people for sleeping outside when no shelter space was available for them. Okay? So they're following the law. They're doing their job. So that's important to consider too. All right? Because now we're talking about issues, systemic issues, not individual bad apples. Systemic problems, But I'll continue. Now I'm going to skip forward 8 lines. City leaders created new laws to give police new tools for criminalization, argued in court for broader interpretation of existing laws, failed to abide by court orders, and sent a clear message to police that their job was to get homeless people out of public sight. It was at this point that it became clear to me that a set of legal and procedural interventions was not going to fix this problem. The police were not a rogue force that just needed some training and legal guidance. They were a highly trained professional force doing exactly what they were being asked to do. The law either directly enabled their activities or was merely a guidepost that set some vague limits on what they could get away with if exposed, but it was easily circumvented in normal circumstances or changed if there was sufficient resistance to its misuse. So let me repeat to you. So the police were not a rogue force that just needed some training and legal guidance, okay? Weren't just like some bunch of bad apples or corrupted cops doing corrupt things. That's not mostly what was going on. What was going on was a highly trained professional force doing exactly what they were being told to do, yet what they were doing was unjust, even though that was what they were trained to do. Okay, that's important. Okay, I'm just going to continue reading here because this is some important information here. What also became clear was that the city of San Francisco, like so many other city administrations, had largely given up on the possibility of housing people or even providing them with emergency shelter. It was intent instead on using police to put a lid on the problem, to relegate people to the darkest recesses of public space so their impact on the rest of the city was minimized as much as possible. This is how I realized that there was a deep functional connection between urban development policy and the criminal legal system. Okay? That's an insight. The apparatus of policing under the guise of the broken windows theory was enabling the city to continue a set of housing and economic development policies that benefited real estate and corporate interests. City leaders should continue to plow money into downtown development schemes that cause the destruction of thousands of low-income housing units, as long as the police can manage the impacts of those directly and indirectly forced into homelessness. The city could continue to underfund essential mental health services to allow more tax breaks for the rich, as long as police kept a tight rein on those left to roam the streets. Policing is a tool that facilitates the imposition of austerity, and efforts to defund the police are an attack on that political process. Policing as a system of social economic control rather than safety enforcement, right? Or safety providing. What is law enforcement actually doing as opposed to what we think law enforcement is doing? Listen to what I read here. In most cities, economic development schemes are generally the product of cooperative arrangements between real estate developers, economic elites, local politicians, and mainstream media outlets. These so-called growth machines work together to organize land use, policy, zoning changes, tax regimes, and subsidies. While there may be competition among specific economic players, the overall emphasis on certain economic sectors or areas of development organizes this process. These economic plans have consequences in terms of gentrification, the destruction of low-cost housing, the undermining of middle-class manufacturing in favor of low-paid service work, and the defunding of social services, schools, and other public goods to pay for various tax breaks and subsidies. This in turn creates a set of social problems such as homelessness, income insecurity, and failed schools that are then labeled problems of crime and disorder that become the responsibility of the police to manage, right? So police as agents of the politically powerful managing social economic power rather than actually addressing issues of safety. And it's very interesting to me because I actually lived that myself in terms of I experienced gentrification because I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area and it got way too expensive to live there. So I had to move to another state to be able to afford living expenses. And that was a luxury for me to move, as crazy as that sound, right? I'd rather not have moved, but I had to afford a place that I could live in. But a lot of people don't have that option, right? They can't just up and move, right? So then they fall into this, income insecurity, homelessness. They become victims of failed schools. And then they get into this system of, quote unquote crime and disorder. And this is what the police manage, right? So we have to think about how is these things that we call crime and disorder, how are they actually coming about or originating, right? And then in what way are law enforcement actually dealing with this? Are they actually solving the problem or are they actually just managing it? But here we are on Roman numeral 12. We're still in the preface. This is the second line. Police exist not primarily to enforce the law or produce public safety, though these can be byproducts at times, but instead to produce a social order by managing the problems that the above regimes of exploitation produce. What we call quote-unquote crime, as well as managing the formal and informal resistance to these regimes of exploitation, everything from rowdy working class pleasures to organized strikes and slave revolts. I skipped down 14 lines. Police abolition is not just about ending policing. Oh, we're talking about abolition. It's not about ending policing. That's not what it's only about. Okay. It is about eliminating regimes of exploitation and building up community power and resources to address harms in more just and restorative ways. So it's an issue of philosophy as well as, practicality and doing the work necessary to get these restorative ways into action, right? But, before we can do the action, we have to figure out how do we do the action? So it requires some philosophical thought. Okay, what is it that we call quote unquote crime? How does crime actually originate? Right? Is it a systemic thing? Or is it like personal responsibility failure? Because that's what's going on. Okay, now we're actually in the book. We're after the preface. This is page 2. This is the third paragraph, and this is the third line. Police argue that residents in high crime communities often demand police action. What is left out is that these communities also ask for better schools, parks, libraries, and jobs, but these services are rarely provided. They lack the political power to obtain real services and support to make their communities safer and healthier. That's damn true. I grew up in a low-income residential area, urban community, East Oakland in the 90s, right? And it was a very policed area, but we still had a large amount of crime because we have poor schools, and we have poor schools not because of the fault of the teachers. It was just the fault of the resources that were put into the schools, right? Individual teachers can only do so much before they break under the pressure of lack of resources and stress, right, of the environment. Our parks weren't good. Our libraries were poorly funded. Jobs were hard to come by. Jobs that provided a living wage, right? These are things I'm very familiar with, and we'd ask for those things and we wouldn't get them, but we definitely would still get more police, right? So what's going on there? So this is page 4. This is the second paragraph, third line. Much of the public debate has focused on new and enhancing training, diversifying the police, and embracing community policing as strategies for reform, along with enhanced accountability measures. However, most of these reforms fail to deal with the fundamental problems inherent in policing, right? So, it's about funding the police, giving them more training, more resources, diversifying the police force, but it is not addressing the fundamental issue that's inherent in the system of law enforcement. Let's talk about that fundamental inherent issue. So here we are on page 14, and this is the last paragraph, way at the bottom of the page. By conceptualizing the problem of policing as one of inadequate training and professionalization, reformers fail to directly address how the very nature of policing and the legal system serve to maintain and exacerbate racial inequality. By calling for colorblind law and order, these are quotes from the book, they strengthen a system that puts people of color at a structural disadvantage and contributes to their deep social and legal estrangement. At root, they fail to appreciate that the basic nature of the law and the police since its earliest origins is to be a tool for managing inequality and maintaining the status quo. Police reforms that fail to directly address this reality are doomed to reproduce it. And I'll continue. This is on the next page, page 15. This is the fifth to the last line. Well-trained police following proper procedure are still going to be arresting people for mostly low-level offenses, and the burden will continue to fall primarily on communities of color because that is how the system is designed to operate, not because of the biases or misunderstandings of officers. Right? Police are just doing their job. They're doing what they're trained to do. Right? But there's still a lot of what's called misconduct or corruption or frankly cruel behavior, right? But they're just following their training. I'll just continue reading because, we're getting at the heart of the matter. This is page 27. Okay, this is the third paragraph. More than anything, however, what we really need is to rethink the role of police in society. The origins and function of the police are intimately tied to the management of inequalities of race and class. The suppression of workers and the tight surveillance and micromanagement of Black and brown lives have always been at the center of policing. Any police reform strategy that does not address this reality is doomed to fail. We must stop looking to procedural reforms and critically evaluate the substantive outcomes of policing. We must constantly reevaluate what the police are asked to do and what impact policing has on the lives of the policed. So, the book goes in depth about the origins of policing, how the police started here in the United States of America and actually throughout the world, right? And I encourage you to read it. To sum it up, globally, the origins of policing was, a way to manage rich people's property and funds, right? And then that trickled down here in the United States of America, where literally the first policing, the first people who were police officers were slave patrol organizations, people making sure slaves were kept in line and they didn't run away or they followed the rules of the master, right? Because back then slaves were property, right? So they were property management, and police officers that were in states where slavery was illegal, northern states, this is the early days of the United States, they controlled the organizations of unions from corporations, right? They were like union busting people. So again, they were controlling the social economic power flow and in favor of people who already had a lot of social economic power. And you can see that origin integrated into the system to this day. That's why you see when crime is punished or dealt with by law enforcement, it is dealt with people who commit crime that are of lower social economic class, people of low income, right? Rather than people who are of higher income. You rarely see that being enforced, as well as people of color. They are the primary targets, or they are primarily targeted by law enforcement, right? Because that's how it was back when it started, and that's how it still is today. It's a system that we've never really addressed. We don't acknowledge the system for what it is. Rather, we're like, we just need to improve individuals that operate within the system. No, we have to address the system itself. And then we have to get even more fundamental than that, right? We have to address what does justice, what is justice? How do we enforce justice, or how do we provide justice? Or what do we see as justice? Because that is messed up today as well. Let me read you the last paragraph here of page 28. Part of the problem is that our politicians, media, and criminal justice institutions too often equate justice with revenge. Popular culture is fused with revenge fantasies in which the aggrieved bring horrible retribution down on those who have hurt them. Often this involves a fantasy of those who have been placed on the margins taking aim at the powerful. It's a fantasy of empowerment through violence. Police and prisons have come to be our preferred tools for inflicting punishment. Our entire criminal justice system has become a gigantic revenge factory. 3-strike laws, sex offender registries, the death penalty, and abolishing parole are about retribution, not safety. Retribution, not safety. Think about this. Now we're diving into the realm of philosophy. What is safety? What is justice? Is justice retribution? Is that what justice is? Is justice revenge? Whole segments of our society have been deemed already guilty. This is not justice, it is oppression. Real justice would look to restore people and communities, to rebuild trust and social cohesion, to offer people a way forward to reduce the social forces that drive crime, and to treat both victims and perpetrators as full human beings. Our police and larger criminal justice system not only failed at this, but rarely see it as even related to their mission. So are they, is justice real justice? like actual justice, what law enforcement or criminal justice systems, like, are they actually doing this? Are they actually providing justice, or are they just revenge factories? Right? What the author is saying. This is why, like I'm saying, it's important to take the philosophical point of view too into perspective. What is justice, right? Or like, how have we instituted justice in our society, and is that correct? Right? Not only are we getting in political philosophy, we're getting into moral philosophy or ethics, which is, very important. So, the author is saying, like, look, it's a system. It doesn't matter if you're, trying to be good or if you're a good person. If you're in a bad system, you're forced to do bad things, right? But, and then he just keeps going with this sentiment where he kind of gives you another angle as well. This is page 29. This is the last paragraph. But not all police mean well. Too many engage in abuse based on race, gender, religion, or economic condition. Explicit and intentional racism is alive and well in American policing. We are asked to believe that these incidents are the misdeeds of a few bad apples. But why does the institution of policing so consistently shield these misdeeds? Too often when biased policing is pointed out, the response is to circle the wagons, deny any intent to do harm, and block any discipline against the officers involved. This sends an unambiguous message that officers are above the law and free to act on their biases without consequence. It also says that the institution is more concerned about defending itself than rooting out these problems. So the primary concern is not rooting out these problems, root cause analysis. That's not the primary concern, but that is what needs to happen. Is our society really made safer and more just by incarcerating millions of people? No. Is asking the police to be the lead agency in dealing with homelessness, mental illness, school discipline, youth unemployment, immigration, youth violence, sex work, and drugs really a way to achieve a better society? Can police really be trained to perform all these tasks in a professional and uncoercive manner? Okay, obviously the answers are no, but the questions persist. Any real agenda for police reform must replace police with empowered communities working to solve their own problems, right? So those are the alternatives. So what the author is getting at is, okay, this system that we have needs to stop, and there needs to be some alternatives, which he goes very much in deep with, and he backs it up with a lot of sociological research. And it's a diverse array of things that we have to do. It's not just one single thing, right? Which is what we're doing now, which is the problem. People will ask, well, what's your alternative to this, that, the violent criminals, serial rapists, mass shooters? What's your alternative? Well, it's a number of different things but it starts with empowered communities working to solve their own problems. Okay, that's where it starts. Okay, so I'm going to read to you, this is page 33, and this is the second paragraph. This is not to say that liberals believe that U.S. policing is without problems. So he brings up liberals. So it's not just, this isn't like liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat. Like, this is not what this is about. Right? Red versus blue, no. This is about, like, he's saying, like, look, there's a problem here from both sides of the equation. They acknowledge that police sometimes violate their principles, but see this as an individual failing to be dealt with through disciplinary procedures or improvements to training and oversight. If entire police departments are discriminatory, abusive, or unprofessional, then they advocate efforts to stamp out bias and bad practices through training, changes in leadership, and a variety of oversight mechanisms until legitimacy is reestablished. They argue that racist and brutal cops can be purged from the profession and an unbiased system of law enforcement reestablished in the interests of the whole society. They want the police to be better trained, more accountable, and less brutal and racist. Laudable goals, but they leave intact the basic institutional functions of the police, which have never really been about public safety or criminal control, right? As we said, and what he's saying, it's not about public safety or crime control. That's not what policing is about. I mean, that's what we are told, but Policing is about controlling social economic power, maintaining that for the people who have the most of that. But we will continue. Liberals want to ignore the profound legacy of racism. Rather than admit the central role of slavery and Jim Crow in both producing wealth for whites and denying basic life opportunities for blacks, they prefer to focus on using a few remedial programs backed up by a robust criminal justice system to transform black people's attitudes so that they will be better able to perform competitively in the labor market. The result, however, is that black Americans start from a diminished position that makes them more likely to come into contact with the criminal justice system and to be treated more harshly by it. What is missing from this liberal approach is any critical assessment. Critical assessment, that's what we're doing right now. Critical assessment of what problems the state is asking the police to solve and whether the police are really the best suited to solve them. We gotta ask these questions. We can't be like, oh, they'll just take care of it. They are just the ones that have to deal with that. But are they actually dealing with it? If you do just a little bit of research, you'll say, okay, actually they're not doing it. So this is not working. Something else needs to be done. But we don't do that critical analysis, do we? Gotta start. At least this author does, right? The reality is that the police exist primarily as a system for managing and even producing inequality by suppressing social movements and tightly managing the behaviors of poor and non-white people, those on the losing end of economic and political arrangements. Okay, we're on page 34. I'm skipping down to the 8 to the last line. While the specific forms that policing takes have changed as the nature of inequality and forms of resistance to it have shifted over time, the basic function of managing the poor, foreign, and non-white on behalf of a system of economic and political inequality remains. Today, we don't have slavery or colonialism in the 19th century sense. Instead, we have a system of neoliberal austerity that has created massive racialized inequality that has led to problems of mass homelessness, untreated mental health, and substance misuse problems, failed schools, mass participation in black markets of drugs, sex work, and stolen goods out of economic necessity. The primary role of police is the management of these problems. Right. So again, let's talk a little bit about how do we define crime in our law enforcement systems today? How is it defined? In what way do we apply the word criminal? Do we exempt people who produce harmful acts, right? Okay, so this is page 52. This is the 6th line. The criminal justice system excuses and ignores crimes of the rich that produce profound social harms while intensely criminalizing the behaviors of the poor and non-white, including those behaviors that produce few social harms. When the crimes of the rich are dealt with, it's generally through administrative controls and civil enforcement rather than aggressive policing, criminal prosecution, and incarceration, which are reserved largely for the poor and non-white. No bankers have been jailed for the 2008 financial crisis despite widespread fraud and the looting of the American economy, which resulted in massive unemployment, homelessness, and economic dislocation. See what I'm saying? Crime applied only to the non-white and the poor. It's very different from crime that rich people commit, right? When you turn on an episode of Cops, you're not seeing an insider trader getting busted by SWAT teams or gang units, right? You're not seeing that. But the crime that they commit creates a lot of harm and violence. But they're not persecuted by law enforcement. You see what I'm saying? But we kind of already know this. We as a society choose to kind of put the blinders on. I skipped one paragraph. Today's modern police are not that far removed from their colonialist forebears. They too enforce a system of laws designed to reproduce and maintain economic inequality, usually along racialized lines. And then the author quotes Michelle Alexander, right? I covered a book that she wrote, The New Jim Crow. Check it out, it's on my channel. But this is a quote from her. Saying mass incarceration is an abysmal failure makes sense, though only if one assumes that the criminal justice system is designed to prevent and control crime. But if mass incarceration is understood as a system of social control, specifically racial control, then the system is a fantastic success. Right, it's true. Because the people who are incarcerated in prison are mostly people of color and poor people. And if that's what it's supposed to be doing, it's doing a damn good job of that. And abolitionists argue that's what the system is supposed to be doing. And this whole providing safety thing, that's just a front. Okay, so this is the page 53. This is the third paragraph, the sixth line at the end. While individual officers may not harbor deep biases, again, we mentioned that, though many do, but some don't, the institution's ultimate purpose has always been one of managing the poor and non-white, rather than producing anything resembling true justice. We just gotta keep hammering it in, because people don't want to confront it. They just want to put the blinders on and say the police are just doing what they need to do. But what are the police actually doing? Right? If you look at the statistics and the sociological research is very clear that they are not providing anything resembling true justice. What they're doing is managing the poor and the non-white. All right, so I'm gonna skip to page 201. Let me read you this quote. The myth of policing in a liberal democracy is that the police exist to prevent political activity that crosses the line into criminal activity, such as property destruction and violence. But they have always focused on detecting and disrupting movements that threaten the economic and political status quo, regardless of the presence of criminality. While on a few occasions this has included actions against the far right, it has overwhelmingly focused on the left, especially those movements tied to workers and racial minorities and those challenging American foreign policy. More recently, focus has shifted to surveillance of Muslims as part of the war on terror and black identity extremists, quote, black identity extremists, as part of an effort to undermine the Black Lives Matter movement. The author mentions several examples of this, but there's many popular examples, like the FBI spying on Martin Luther King and even sending him weird death threats, like the FBI doing that. So we're not just talking about street police. We're talking about FBI, CIA, NSA, all these law enforcement, criminal justice system organizations and institutions, right? We're talking about the whole system. It's all about managing socio-economic power, and that includes managing political activity, right? And social justice movements, managing that and making sure they don't get too powerful and threatening the people who already have a lot of social economic power and are exploiting the poor and the non-white. Right? The police manage this. And again, I would encourage you to, because there's pages and pages of examples here. This is a well-researched book. If you don't buy that argument, there's plenty of examples there. But let me go to page 221 here. And let's talk about some deep philosophy, some more deep philosophy, in terms of police abolition, okay? This is the second paragraph of page 221. There is a larger truth that must be confronted. As long as the basic mission of police remains unchanged, none of these changes will be achievable. And he's talking about all the alternatives, because people are all about what's your alternative for, extremely violent criminals, or what's your alternative for homelessness, or, rather than the police, or what's your alternative for mental health, all these challenges, right, that the police are supposed to deal with. Vitale brings up several alternatives, which, he's echoing many other police abolitionists or abolitionists generally. There are ideas that are well researched and well thought out that are put on the table that we can utilize other than the police. That's why it's important to read books like this, books that talk about alternative methods to providing safety and deliver justice other than police and law enforcement agencies and institutions. But, I'll continue reading because what the author is saying is that none of these changes that they're putting on the table will be achievable unless we confront this larger truth of, okay, this is why the police really exist. The truth that nobody wants to talk about. Why are the police really here? What are they really doing, right? People don't want to confront that horror. They're actually managing rich people's property. That's what they're doing. They're making sure that they still got their capital. Right. If that's true, wow. Right? But they don't, let's confront that truth. There's no technocratic fix. Even if we could somehow implement these changes, they would be ignored, resisted, and overturned because the institutional imperatives of the politically motivated wars on drugs, disorder, gangs, terrorism, crime, etc. would win out. Powerful political forces benefit from abusive, aggressive, and invasive policing. That's a truth. Right? That's a hard truth. Powerful political forces benefit from abusive, aggressive, and invasive policing. There's an incentive. You see these things in the news, these events like, police brutality, police misconduct, police corruption. There's people benefiting off of that. And they are not going to be won over or driven from power by technical arguments or heartfelt appeals to do the right thing. Or, what I said in the very beginning of the video, abstract theoretical philosophy. Right? We gotta bring philosophy into the real world and utilize it as a tool to create actual change for society. I argue this is the philosophy of abolition. So let me read you page 226. This is the second to last line. This is important, right? Because he says, both of our major political parties have accepted politics and austerity that globalized capital has imposed on us. Okay? So it's, again, let's not fall into the trap of conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican, right? No. Both of these sides or political parties have fallen into this trap. The neoliberal movement has been incredibly successful in normalizing the view that the only way to move forward is to unleash the creative power of a small number of economic elites by stripping away all regulation, worker protections, and financial obligations so that they can maximize their wealth at the expense of the rest of us. We're talking about Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, those elites, right? Have mass fortunes at the expense and exploitation of most of everybody else. And that needs to be managed, right? And the police are one of the many tools that are used, one of the primary tools used to manage this kind of exploitation. For 40 years, we've been told that the result will be a rising tide for everyone, a trickling down of the spoils. But we're still waiting. Wages and living standards for all but the wealthiest continue to decline. The middle class is being eviscerated, poverty and mass homelessness are increasing, and our infrastructure is collapsing. When we organize our society around fake meritocracy, we erase the history of exploitation and the ways that the game is rigged to prevent economic and social mobility. When people complain about these realities, they are told it's their own fault, that they didn't try hard enough to be part of the glorious 1%, that they don't have what it takes and thus deserve to be degraded. This justifies defining all the problems in terms of individual inadequacy, calling those left behind the architects of their own misery. Rather than using government resources to reduce inequality, this economic system both subsidizes inequality and criminalizes those it leaves behind, especially when they demand something better. So, it's about the individual who's responsible, and it's their failing. Nobody wants to talk about the system, right? Or, some people will say, the system, it's not perfect, but that's what we got. Nobody wants to be like, okay, maybe this is a fucked up system, and maybe we do need a new one. But, it's more like, it's just a system we got, and you just got to play the game. And if you don't play the game, you're a loser, right? That's the way we look at it today. And that needs to change. The massive increases in policing and incarceration over the last 40 years rest on an ideological argument that crime and disorder are the results of personal moral failing and can only be reduced by harsh punitive sanctions. This neoconservative approach protects and reinforces the political social and economic disenfranchisement of millions who are tightly controlled by aggressive and invasive policing or warehoused in jails and prisons. We must break these intertwined systems of oppression. Every time we look to the police and prisons to solve our problems, we reinforce those processes. So this is page 236, second paragraph, third line. What we call violent crime is actually only a subset of the bodily harms inflicted on vulnerable communities. Predatory lending, environmental pollution, inadequate health care, and nutrition, and yes, even police violence are all sources of profound harm that reduces life expectancy and everyday quality of life for those affected. Okay, so these are things that aren't considered crime, or they're not like policed heavily, like a lot of nonviolent crime, like homelessness, or like somebody suffering from mental health popping off at the street, or sex work, for instance, or drug misuse, right? You know, you got corporations doing environmental pollution. You know, they got pharmaceutical companies, you know, providing inadequate health care or like extremely exorbitant expensive health care, and those aren't considered crimes, right? Okay, this is the last paragraph of page 236. It turns out that the state and the police are only interested in a small subset of harms inflicted on poor people. And even then, their role has historically been one of managing these harms rather than preventing them. Consequently, the harms experienced in poor, especially non-white communities, too often were largely overlooked as long as they didn't spill over into wealthier areas or interfere with larger economic and political concerns. For decades, police actually enabled harms in such places by either turning a blind eye to the community's needs or encouraging the concentration of black market activity like drugs, gambling, and sex work. I can attest, being born and raised in one of those communities where police, you know, turn a blind eye to all these issues, actually partake in many of them, and, you know, arrested, incarcerated, or even violently attacked people that were pushed to the point where they could do none other than those things to survive. And that pushing to that desperate situation was managed by police, which is why you have, you know, rap songs and, you know, hip hop songs like NWA, F the Police, that kind of stuff, which is still said today, you know, because these people who grew up in that environment and are aware of the situation, me, myself, know what's up. You know, we're like, you know, they're enabling all this that's going on. That's what they call wrong. They're the enablers, right? So F the police, right? You know, a lot of those songs of the early 90s, right, even the late 80s, were of that mold and sentiment. So next page, 238, second paragraph. The fact is that policing is a reactive enterprise after the damage has already been done, and it only gives the appearance of utility. Police take reports and sometimes find perpetrators, but they almost never actually protect someone facing imminent harm. And, you know, there's plenty of citations that he puts in the text that you can look up, a lot of research that he's done that shows safety is often not provided by police action based off of this research, all this research that he cites. Okay, this is page 241, the 10th to the last paragraph. When problems are turned over to police, it means that violence and the threat of violence are being unleashed on communities, even when it is narrowly focused on those deemed to be the sources of violence. In addition, the legal system has been designed to excuse all but the most egregious cases of abusive police violence. The result is the emergence of terms like lawful but awful to justify images of police violence that are disturbing to see, but that police apologists insist are okay because they depict legally justifiable actions. You know, you see that in television shows like Law and Order, or, you know, NCIS, or like all those other cop shows where, you know, you see the police officer that's troubled and he's like doing like shady stuff, but it's okay because he has to get the bad guy, right? And, you know, that kind of brainwashing or indoctrination, you know, has given us this false idea that police are like actually like providing safety. And, you know, they're not. What they're really doing is, again, just managing the resources of the most wealthy. Okay, so this is page 242, third paragraph. Violence is not one thing. It takes many forms and has many underlying causes, both immediate and structural. One of the problems with police-centered approaches is that they rely on this one tool to deal with sexual assault, intimate partner violence, youth violence, serial killers, politically motivated violence, and so on. We need strategies crafted to address specific dynamics as they are experienced in specific places. We can't just come up with one abstract general plan and then expect it to work everywhere for all problems. Preach. Okay. People ask, what's your alternative? Well, it depends, right? And, we have to do the work of developing that. It's going to be complicated and it's going to be multi-part, multifaceted. But we need to do that because the system we have now is not working. Domestic violence strategies in poor immigrant neighborhoods might look different from ones in middle-class white communities. Youth violence strategies in communities with intergenerational gangs should be different from strategies where young people are more isolated or their associations are more informal and fleeting. For each of these dynamics, there exists concrete examples of programmatic interventions designed to address that harmful behavior without involving the police. Okay, so yeah, I gotta understand because there's so many people like, well, if we don't have the police, what are we gonna do, right? Or like, you're crazy. You think we can't? How are we gonna address these problems if we don't have the cops? There are concrete examples that have been well studied, well thought out, that are on the table, ready to be implemented, or at least put into some sort of pilot program. But a lot of these examples have already been through the pilot program and have proved successful. Yet we still choose not to implement them. And if you want to know, I encourage you, read the book, or there's many other abolition books that detail heavily alternatives to policing to provide safety and offer justice. You can also, comment below and I will discuss, but I largely skip alternatives because a video like that would be 10, 15 hours, right? Because like what the author is saying is violence is not one thing. It's complicated. What kind of violence are we dealing with, right? Because there's going to be a set of solutions that are going to be different to address that specific kind of violent event or issue or situation. This is page 243. The second paragraph, fourth line. There are many possible approaches to take, and we need more experimentation and evaluation to determine which work best under different conditions. So I encourage you, if anything, I hope this video just kind of lays down hey, abolition, the idea to abolish policing, that is not some crack job, some crazy far out there notion that it's just some crazy person saying it, right? It's some serious research has been done that has shown that, police actually don't address problems of safety. They, when we really think about what justice is, the criminal justice system that we have is not providing it. There are better ways to deal with these, to deal with the issue of crime. First of all, we have to do a better job at defining what crime is, and we also have to reckon with social justice, which I know that's a very taboo topic that people don't want to even think about, right? When you're talking about race, you're talking about religion, you're talking about class. Oh no, I don't want to deal with that. But these are the things that we're going to have to deal with if we want to have a successful approach to providing safety and providing justice. Okay, and what this right here, the policing is not giving us that. So I will conclude with this final quote from the afterword of the 2021 edition. This is the 11th to last line, page 249. We must move beyond rhetoric and social media posts and directly engage in political struggles to reorient the basic values and priorities of society. We cannot just produce master plans or wait for revolutionary change. Okay? Can't just do that. Can't just debate on the internet. Right? We gotta put these ideas into action. We gotta put philosophy into action. Can't just read books. Right? You gotta put what we've read and utilize it to make some actual productive change. We must instead do the hard work of building up communities in ways that address their specific needs. We must talk with our neighbors, friends, family, and coworkers about what we can do to improve their safety while breaking down racism and systems of economic exploitation. Okay? Breaking down race, confronting racism and systems of economic exploitation. That's why I call myself Black Ponder, because I'm choosing not to avoid the elephant in the room. It's something we got to address. We can't pretend it's not there, because it's there. And we're seeing it in, the way we deal with justice in our society and how bad we deal with that need. There are no shortcuts to engaging people where they are and working together to chart a better path for the future. There's no shortcuts. So let's talk, let's discuss. You may feel like, wow, that's, you gotta have police, right? Or like, what about that violent guy that was like, did this horrible thing? And like, how are we gonna deal with that? Let's talk about it in the comments below. And, also let's talk to people in real life too. That's important. Talk to our neighbors, talk to our family, talk to our friends about like, is society really providing what we think society is providing? Are our social institutions actually giving us what we think they're supposed to be giving us? Right. Well, let's talk about that. That's why I like to provide these kinds of books on my channel to talk about them. So maybe you can go to the library and check this out if it's not banned at your local library, because apparently this book is being, on the consideration of being banned, which is sad because, if it's being banned, then there's talking about something that's some red hot button issue. But in any case, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.